Ellie Donovan had two Wyoming 117 confirmed kills as an elite Green Beret sniper before she traded in her rifle scope for the open skies of Pine Creek, Montana. For the last few years, she had lived quietly on Riverbend Farm, raising her two children, Kayla, 14, and Jonah, 8, determined to give them a childhood free from the violence and uncertainty that once defined her life. But Pine Creek, with its sweeping prairies and timeless mountains, was about to become anything but peaceful. It started with the arrival of the Black Vultures Motorcycle Club, rolling into town on growling Harleys as if they already owned the place. Their leader, a tall, scar-faced man who called himself Reaper, had a cruel gleam in his eyes and a leather patch identifying him as president of the Black Vultures. With him were three of his lieutenants, Galefang and Redwood, each exuding the coiled readiness of men who had seen combat before. They quickly made their presence known, stopping by the Pine Creek Diner, swaggering in like they owned the counters and booths, asking loaded questions about local farms, overdue taxes, and struggling ranchers. The rumor around town was that the Black Vultures specialized in exploiting families living on the edge, families behind on mortgage payments or faced with emergency bills. They'd offer help for a monthly fee, and if owners didn't comply, barns mysteriously burned, livestock vanished, or children got threatened after dark. Ellie first heard about them from Louise Patterson, her elderly neighbor who owned Pine Creek's feed and supply store. Louise had phoned that morning, voice trembling with an urgency Ellie rarely heard. "There were 4 of them at the diner last night," Louise explained. "They kept asking about your place, who owns it, how many acres, where the kids go to school." "I don't like it, Ellie. They're looking for trouble." Ellie felt a familiar tension flare within her, a reflex that once kept her alive through countless deployments. She did her best to appear calm for her daughter Kayla, who was chopping vegetables for dinner, and for Jonah, who tried to read every flicker of worry in his mother's eyes. Later that day, Ellie drove the old farm pickup into the center of Pine Creek, a single stretch of road with wooden storefronts that had changed little over the decades. James Brooks, a fellow veteran who ran a small mechanic's garage, waved her over the moment she parked. "Donovan," he said in a low voice, glancing around warily. "Heard some guys on bikes came in yesterday. They were messing with old man Crandall's property last week." She nodded. "Yeah, Louise said they were asking questions about my farm too." James exhaled heavily. "Crandall's barn went up in flames 2 days after he refused to pay them anything. Sheriff Barlow ruled it an electrical fault, but we all know better." They walked down to Louise Patterson's store together, where Mark Walters, another local farmer, was waiting. Mark had the same story. The Black Vultures threatened him with accidents if he didn't fork over cash for their so-called protection. Inside the store, Ellie found Louise behind the counter, anxiously fiddling with receipts. "I've seen a few of them riding around your property line since morning. The older woman said, 'I'm worried for you and the kids.'" Ellie set a reassuring hand on Louise's shoulder. "I'll be careful. If you see Kayla and Jonah alone around town, keep an eye out." Louise nodded solemnly. "Of course, dear, though I suspect you're not as defenseless as you pretend." Ellie said nothing to confirm or deny that she'd kept her background off the local radar for a reason. Her official story was that she'd served a few years in the Army and moved on. She never advertised she was once among the top snipers in the Green Berets, a specialist in counter-surveillance and advanced marksmanship. She wanted none of that life near her children. Yet the next morning, multiple sightings of the Black Vultures along Riverbend Farm's fence line forced her to acknowledge she might not have a choice. Kayla and Jonah saw them, 2 black-leathered figures, pacing near the road, as if measuring distances for some future plan. Even the family dog Scout barked, incessantly alarmed by their presence. By late afternoon, Ellie found the first threatening note tacked to her front gate. It read, "Protecting your farm doesn't come free. We'll be in touch. Don't make our next visit unpleasant." Ellie tore it down, mind racing. She wanted to give the legal route a chance first. Sheriff Barlow was a decent man, but budget cuts and staff shortages had left him undermanned. If the situation escalated quickly, help might not arrive in time. That evening, Jonah huddled next to his mother on the porch, his small hand in hers. "Mom," he said, voice trembling, "are those men gonna come here and hurt us?" Ellie wrapped an arm around him, remembering how she'd promised never to raise her kids in fear. "Not if I can help it," she answered. Kayla, strong-willed, and more like her mother than she knew, joined them. "We won't run, right, Mom? This farm's been in our family for 3 generations. Ellie squeezed her daughter's shoulder. We're not going anywhere. Quietly, while the children slept, Ellie went out to the old barn and slipped behind a concealed panel of hay bales. There in the hollowed-out wall lay her old equipment, a carefully maintained M96 sniper rifle, a sidearm advanced optics boxes of ammunition, and the same tactical gear that had accompanied her through deployments in distant deserts and jungles. She began methodically stripping and cleaning the rifle heart, pounding, with the realization that she was on the verge of stepping back into a life she had fought so hard to leave. As she worked, she recalled her old commander's words, "You pick up that rifle again. Donovan makes sure you understand the cost, but this wasn't about vengeance or glory. It was about defending her children, her land, her neighbors, everything she had tried to preserve in this quiet life. If the Black Vultures wanted to start a war, they had no idea who they were dealing with." The next day, Ellie decided to see if the sheriff's department could help. She parked outside the cramped wood-paneled office of Sheriff Barlow, who was on the phone the moment she stepped in. He waved her toward a rickety chair, and within minutes she recounted the threats from the Black Vultures. "I know," Barlow said tiredly. "I've had 3 calls about them this week. Barn fires, extortion, intimidation. Problem is they never leave enough evidence behind. Nothing that'll hold up in court." Ellie stared at the badges and commendations on the wall. "You do realize they're going to keep pushing, right? They're in full expansion mode." Barlow nodded. "I'll send extra patrols by Riverbend Farm, but I've only got 2 deputies. We're stretched thin. If you get something solid, license plates, direct threats, let me know." She left with little reassurance. Outside, she spotted 2 motorcycles with Black Vultures patches parked near the diner. Through the diner's window, she could see Reaper himself sipping coffee, flanked by Gale and Fang. Their conversation paused the moment Ellie stepped onto the sidewalk. She chose to walk on. They followed her out, Miss Donovan, Reaper drawled, leaning against his bike. "Heard your farm's had a string of bad luck. Could get worse if you don't get protection." Fang, a muscular figure with tattoos crawling up his arms, added, "A barn fire is a nasty thing, you know. Lots of flammable materials out there in the fields." Ellie folded her arms. "Is that what you did to Crandall's place?" Reaper's half-smile didn't reach his eyes. Crandall was a fool who didn't see reason. "I'm hoping you're smarter." The tension was thick. Ellie imagined pinning Fang's arm behind his back in a heartbeat. Her instincts practically vibrated with readiness. But she had children to consider, and making the first overt move in broad daylight on a public street would land her in a legal quagmire. "I'm not interested," she said, voice low. "Suit yourself," Reaper replied. "Just remember you've got a lot to lose." They roared off, leaving her standing amid a swirl of dust. That afternoon, Ellie realized the Black Vultures were escalating. Multiple riders appeared around her property, circling like vultures, waiting for the wounded to collapse. Kayla spotted them from her bedroom window. Jonah was too scared to go outside for chores alone. By dusk, the tension grew unbearable. James Brooks drove up with a shotgun visible on his passenger seat, stepping out onto Ellie's porch. "I served overseas too," James said softly. "I'm not going to let these guys tear apart our town without a fight." Ellie nodded her thanks. "I appreciate it. I'd rather settle this legally, but they're not giving us that option." He looked at her knowingly. "Heard rumors you were more than just a supply clerk in the Army. People say you were special ops." She kept her tone calm. "Something like that." Before they could say more, headlights glared along the dirt road. 4 motorcycles advanced, including Reaper's. Their engines idled menacingly at the gate. "Last chance," Donovan Reaper yelled through the dark. "Pay up or get burned out." James Brooks lifted his shotgun, but Ellie motioned for him to hold position. "Children," she murmured, not wanting Kayla and Jonah exposed to gunfire. "They're just trying to bait us." Then came a shattering sound. One of the bikers threw a bottle lit with a rag, an improvised Molotov cocktail over the fence. Ellie dove, hitting the ground. Ears ringing, flames burst in the field, illuminating swirling smoke and terrified livestock. She scrambled for the garden hose, cursing under her breath. James fired a warning shot over the attackers' heads. One of the Black Vultures yelped, dropping another flaming bottle. The bike sped away amid laughter and jeers. It was a small miracle that the fire only scorched a narrow path through the wheat. Had the wind been stronger, Riverbend Farm would have been lost. Kayla and Jonah ran out, eyes wide as Ellie and James doused the last embers. "That was just a taste," James said grimly, wiping sweat from his brow. "They'll come back harder." Ellie nodded, adrenaline surging. "I know. That's why it ends now." She ushered her children inside, locked the doors, then went to the barn. She pulled out that hidden rifle and a tactical vest stuffed with gear she'd hoped never to use again. Memories of foreign rooftops, desert dunes, and moonlit jungles all came flooding back. By first light, Ellie had mapped out defensive positions around the farm, marking vantage points where a sniper could dominate entire fields without being seen. She taught Kayla where to hide if gunfire erupted, drilled Jonah on how to reach the neighbor's property by the creek if the situation became truly dire. At noon, Louise Patterson rushed over breathless. "They're at it again, dear. Heard them bragging in town about how easy it'll be to run you off." Ellie calmly pressed a hand to Louise's. "Tell the other families to keep their distance for now. I don't want anyone else getting hurt." "They might not listen," Louise warned. "This town has heart. They'll want to help." Ellie nodded, a small smile ghosting her lips. "That's exactly why we'll win." The Black Vultures arrived in the early evening, this time in greater numbers, 8 bikes plus a pickup truck loaded with fuel cans. Reaper and Gale took the lead. "Donovan," Reaper called out. "We had an agreement." Ellie stepped forward with quiet resolve. "I never agreed to anything. This is private land. I'm telling you to leave." His gaze flicked over her vest, the faint outline of a sidearm, the set of her shoulders that spoke of professional training. For a moment, doubt flickered across his scarred face. But Gale at his side sneered. "She's just one woman," Gale said loud enough for all to hear. Ellie lifted her rifle into view. "Are you sure about that?" For a split second, no one moved. Then the bikers spread out in a classic flanking maneuver. Ellie recognized it immediately. This was more than random intimidation. They had some real tactical background. James Brooks chose that moment to emerge from behind the barn, shotgun in hand. "You boys best find someplace else to be." Jonah and Kayla watched from a second-story window. They saw their mother's posture shift, the subtle readiness in her stance, and felt a spark of awe. "You got until the count of 3, Ellie said calmly, raising her rifle. "Then I start shooting." Gale gunned his motorcycle, possibly to charge forward. But Ellie's expression froze him in place. 1-2 Reaper's group seemed to understand the danger. "We'll be back," Reaper hissed, revving his engine. "This isn't over." They left a cloud of dust as they pulled away, but Ellie didn't lower her weapon until the roar of their bikes faded completely. James let out a breath. "You just declared war." Ellie shook her head. "They did that first. I'm just finishing it." That night she got almost no sleep. The local network of farmers and townsfolk, alarmed by the day's confrontation, were on high alert. Some volunteered to form a rotating guard, but Ellie politely declined large gatherings at her property. She needed minimal interference if hostilities escalated. She knew how to handle this. The following morning, Louise Patterson drove up, accompanied by Dr. Hannah Carter, Pine Creek's veterinarian, who doubled as a kind of unofficial medical provider for the rural area. Hannah's eyes darted to the rifle leaning by the barn. "Louise told me about last night," Hannah said. "Just wanted to check if everyone's okay." Ellie nodded. "We're fine for now. The kids are inside doing chores. I appreciate your concern." Hannah glanced again at the weapon. "Mind if I ask where you learned to handle that kind of firepower?" Ellie gave a neutral smile. "Army." That's all. Hannah didn't push, but her expression said she guessed more. She set down a medical kit. "I have a feeling we'll need a triage plan if things get worse. I can treat injuries at my clinic in town. Just say the word." As if in response, multiple motorcycles thundered by. Reaper and his men didn't stop, but they looked closely at Louise's and Hannah's vehicles, making no secret that they were taking note of every ally Ellie had. Once the bikes disappeared over the hill, Hannah turned back to Ellie. "It's clear they mean a business. Watch your back." "I will," Ellie promised. It happened at dawn. The Black Vultures approached from 3 sides, using the same flanking tactics Ellie recognized from specialized infantry maneuvers. She was on the porch, Kayla and Jonah safely hidden in the root cellar beneath the house, while James Brooks guarded a vantage point behind an old tractor. Sparks of gunfire flashed across the field. One bullet whizzed past the porch post, embedding itself in the outer wall. Ellie dove behind a stack of hay bales, heart pounding, but mind coldly focused, a sniper's clarity. She had mapped these firing lanes in her head, planned angles for return fire. They're pinned behind the barn on the west side, James barked over a handheld radio. You see them? Ellie peered down her rifle scope. Gale and Fang were crouched, exchanging hand signals, preparing to move on the barn's blind spot. She exhaled slowly, fired a single shot. The round hit inches in front of Fang's foot, deliberately off target, but close enough to spook him. What the hell? Fang shouted, retreating behind an overturned water trough. Meanwhile, Reaper led the main group along the eastern fence. One man hurled a Molotov cocktail that ignited a cluster of wild shrubs. Smoke billowed. Ellie repositioned, waiting for a clear line of sight. Suddenly, headlights cut through the morning haze. Louise Patterson's battered pickup, followed by Mark Walters and two other local farmers. They had come despite Ellie's warnings, unwilling to see Riverbend Farm overrun. The newcomers opened fire in the air, warning shots only, but enough to make some of the bikers hesitate. A few tried to circle around, only to find James Brooks firing from another angle. Ellie's voice crackled through a shortwave radio everyone carried. No lethal shots unless absolutely necessary, she commanded. They don't deserve to die here. They just need to stop. She watched Redwood jump on his bike to flank them from behind the tractor, so she squeezed off one more bullet. It sheared through the motorcycle's front tire, sending Redwood tumbling. He scrambled away unharmed, but shaken. She's a sniper, Redwood yelled. Reaper, she's got us zeroed. The entire confrontation shifted. The Black Vultures, once brazen and smug, realized they were pinned down by someone far more skilled than they'd anticipated. Reaper crouched behind the eastern fence, fumed. Fall back, he roared. The bikers retreated, leaving behind black tire tracks in the dirt and a field scorched by stray Molotovs. Smoke drifted lazily across the sunrise as Louise, James, Mark, and the others converged near the barn, hearts still hammering. Not sure how long before they come back, Mark Walters said, scanning the horizon. Ellie lowered her rifle. They might return with bigger numbers or worse tactics. 2 days of tense calm followed. The Black Vultures vanished from Pine Creek's roads and diner. Some locals hoped it meant they'd given up. Ellie suspected they were regrouping, planning something new. Sure enough, ominous developments rolled in. Dr. Hannah Carter discovered that some of the bikers were ex-military, not just random thugs. They'd made inquiries about heavier arms, possibly even old military-grade explosives. During the lull, Kayla confronted her mother. Mom, Jonah and I can't stay locked in the cellar every time they show up. We want to help. Ellie hesitated. I don't want you anywhere near their line of fire. Kayla's eyes flashed with determination. You taught us to stand up for ourselves. Ellie sighed. All right, but help in ways that keep you safe. Spotting from the attic, for instance. Or guiding neighbors along the creek path if we have to evacuate. That night, Jonah carefully set up small sensor alarms at key points along the fence. Little devices powered by old radio parts, each one rigged to beep if a person crossed the property boundary. Kayla took the attic scanning with binoculars, learning how to track approaching vehicles by dust trails on the horizon. By the following weekend, the entire town had gotten involved. Civic leaders called a meeting at the old Pine Creek Hall. The place was packed, farmers in dusty overalls, local shopkeepers, ranch hands, and even a few travelers. Passing through, Sheriff Barlow tried to maintain order. We can't fight a whole motorcycle gang alone, folks. We need the state police. Maybe the feds. James Brooks shook his head. We'd be waiting forever for them to show up, if they even bother. We have to defend ourselves, Louise Patterson added. We also need to keep it legal. We can't just start vigilante warfare. Ellie spoke up from the back. If they come at us again, we'll have no choice but to resist, but we should keep records. Document everything that way. If the authorities ever get serious, we have evidence. Everyone looked at her, half in admiration, half in dread, knowing she'd already demonstrated she was capable of more than just talk. The next morning at dawn, Kayla's voice crackled over the radio. Mom, I count at least 10 bikes. They're approaching from the south near the old orchard. Ellie grabbed her rifle, heart pounding. Jonah peered out from the barn, confirming the count. James Brooks, stationed on the adjacent property, radioed that multiple riders were spotted flanking the orchard. A chill wind swept across the farm as the dust clouds rose from distant motorcycles. Ellie braced herself on a vantage point by the house. Through the scope, she spotted Reaper in the lead with Gale and Fang on either side. Redwood behind them, their expressions were grim and resolute. "Well, well," Reaper shouted, his voice echoing across the orchard. "Thought you'd seen the last of us." Ellie's voice came through a handheld speaker. "I'm giving you one chance to leave. Nobody needs to die." He spat on the ground. "You humiliated us. I can't let that stand. We're finishing this today." A hush fell, broken only by the soft ticking of Jonah's homemade sensors. Kayla reported movement behind a cluster of apple trees. Fang was carrying what looked like a mortar tube or some improvised launcher. They brought bigger toys. Kayla warned James and the other farmers spread out, forming a loose perimeter. But Ellie could see fear in many eyes. This was no longer a simple farmland skirmish. The black vultures were escalating to near military tactics. Reaper raised his hand. "Fire!" he yelled. The orchard erupted with roaring blasts as small incendiary shells arced through the air. One slammed into the field, igniting tall grass. Another exploded near a wooden fence, sending shards flying. Ellie had no time for half measures. She lined up a shot and fired at the makeshift launcher, aiming not to kill, but to disable. The bullet ricocheted off the metal, throwing Fang off balance. "They've got a sniper," Redwood shouted again, panic creeping into his voice. Ellie's vantage point let her control the orchard's open spaces. With precise shots, she forced the vultures to scatter, limiting their ability to coordinate. Meanwhile, James Brooks took out the tires of 2 parked bikes, stranding more of them on foot. Amid the chaos, Louise arrived in her truck, bringing extra water hoses to fight the orchard fires. Dr. Hannah Carter set up a makeshift triage area near the barn, ready for any wounded. "We're pinned." Gale yelled at Reaper, crouched behind a gnarled apple tree. "We gotta pull back!" Reaper's expression twisted with rage. He signaled Redwood to toss one last incendiary device toward the farmhouse. Ellie watched it spin through the air, her stomach lurching at the thought of her children inside. A single rifle shot cracked through the orchard. Ellie's bullet found the device mid-arc, knocking it harmlessly into a ditch. It exploded, but far from any structures. That was the final straw. Realizing they couldn't break Riverbend Farms' defenses without suffering major casualties, the bikers scrambled for whatever transport they could salvage and fled. When the dust settled, Ellie emerged, rifle still in hand, scanning for stragglers. It was over fields, smoldered orchard trees, charred Kayla, and Jonah crept out from hiding, relief etched on their faces. The local farmers who had braved the fight stood together in a loose circle, some shaking, others hugging. "They're not coming back, at least not soon," James said, voice tight with emotion. Louise Patterson surveyed the damage. "We'll rebuild. Could have been much worse without everyone pulling together." Ellie exhaled, lowering her rifle. "Thank you, all of you." In the days that followed, Pine Creek's broader community pulled resources to restore Riverbend Farms' damaged fields, fix the orchard fence, and help anyone else the black vultures had terrorized. Sheriff Barlow, seeing the aftermath, finally declared the bikers wanted for multiple felonies. The state authorities sent investigators, though late to the crisis, yet the deeper victory lay in something intangible. Pine Creek had discovered its own power. Neighbors learned they weren't isolated homesteads ripe for intimidation. They had the means and, more importantly, the will to stand together. Kayla and Jonah walked the property without fear, now having witnessed both their mother's courage and the community's unity. Dr. Hannah Carter, James Brooks, Louise Patterson, and Mark Walters continued to rally others, ensuring that threats like the black vultures would never find easy prey in Pine Creek again. For Ellie Donovan, the cost was steep. She had picked up the rifle she'd once sworn to lock away forever, taking life or death aim again. But as she watched Kayla and Jonah run freely through the open fields at dusk, she knew she would never regret defending them. Protecting her family and home was worth any risk. One clear, cool morning, as Ellie repaired a fence post Kayla had accidentally broken during a rush to spot incoming threats, she paused to glance out over the horizon. The farmland stretched peacefully, touched by the soft glow of sunrise. She closed her eyes and remembered that her old life as a Green Beret sniper had been about service, standing guard against those who would harm others. In Pine Creek, she'd found that same calling in a new form. The Black Vultures might return someday, or perhaps new villains would arrive thinking Pine Creek an easy mark. But they would discover the same truth Reaper had learned too late, threatening a former Special Forces sniper. And her determined community is a losing proposition. Because in places like Pine Creek, the fiercest battles aren't decided by who has the biggest guns, but by the people with the steadfast courage to defend what they love and the skill to ensure no predator leaves unscathed. Looking back at Ellie Donovan's story, it's clear she proved one powerful truth. True strength comes not just from the weapons you wield, but from the courage and unity of a community standing together. Pine Creek emerged stronger and safer, driven by the bravery of ordinary people, who became extraordinary when it mattered most. Ellie's determination showed that no threat can overpower a mother's resolve to protect her children and home. What do you think about Ellie's decision to confront the outlaws directly? Could the community have handled the situation differently? Let's hear your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to discuss and hear your perspectives. Don't forget to like this story and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring and exciting tales.